After last week's U-turn on some of the government's climate measures, Rishi Sunak's decision to approve further development of oil and gas in the North Sea was denounced by campaigners. Labour has attacked the decision and says it won't approve any more drilling in the North Sea, but neither will it rescind the licences granted by this government. How did Britain move from feeling very proud of its oil and gas production to regarding oil companies as pariahs? To answer that question, I've invited Tom Burke, co-founder of the climate think tank E3G, and Richard Ritchie, who was for many years Director of Government Affairs at BP. Welcome to you both. Richard, I should mention that I used to work for an oil company as well. How should you and I feel about the fact that oil companies are more and more being treated as pariahs?
With surprise, and I don't feel any sense of shame for having worked for one for so long. I believe that oil companies and the gas industry as well, oil and gas provides an essential public service, but it's done by the private sector. It keeps all the vital mechanisms of this country going, and I'm very proud to have played a part in it. Now, whether it will forever, that doesn't worry me. I mean, every type of energy is eventually made obsolete by something else. But there is nothing to be ashamed of in terms of one's past, and there's nothing to be ashamed about in terms of its present, as long as one is not holding up the options of future developments elsewhere.
I mean, for example, arts bodies have decided to sever their connections and their sponsorship with oil companies. I imagine you, like I, might think that's a mistake, but do you also think that oil companies, because they're big and powerful and they're experienced in engineering, can play quite a big part in solving the issues of the future?
I certainly think the oil and gas industry has a part to play in what's called the transition from where we are today to where we will have to go tomorrow. I have absolutely no doubt about that. You raise an interesting thing about the opera and oil companies. I mean, I think one of the reasons why the oil companies may be disliked is because they have appeased those who dislike them. And I was never very much, I mean, as you know, I know that you adore opera, I adore opera, but I was never convinced that it was in BP's interests to sponsor those occasions. And I think Stop Oil may have done us a favour, and certainly done BP's shareholders a favour, in saying they don't want our money. We can put it somewhere else.
Tom, does just stop oil make any sense? We can't just stop oil. We're still heavily dependent upon it. And by the way, we don't just use it to burn. We also use it in chemicals, plastics, fertilisers and other things which are very important in our lives.
No, I agree with that. We can't just stop oil. Nobody's proposing that we should just stop oil. People are campaigning, using the oil company, in a sense, to give expression to their frustration at the shortage, the slow pace at which governments are doing something we need to do much faster than we're doing now. By the way, I also used to work for BP, so I'm another oil. So we have a trio of people who've worked for BPs. I was a colleague with Ritchie for some time. So I completely agree with him about there's nothing to be ashamed about in working for an oil company. I think there really is a thing about some of the American oil companies that work very actively to suppress and challenge in a underhand way the science of climate change earlier on, which slowed down the transition. I think that's something the oil companies everywhere have got to deal with. But we're not going to get rid of oil or gas overnight.
When you see the engineering challenges that were faced, not least in the North Sea, you saw these enormous platforms that were taken out there. And by the way, they were constructed super quickly. You know, it wasn't like High Speed 2. They were done in a year or two, and out they went, and they produced this oil. You think that sort of engineering skill could be jolly useful for the future? Because, you know, with wind turbines, we're also building colossal engineering projects on this scale.
That's absolutely right. And it's not just the engineering, it's the project management skills, as we're discovering with HS2. You know, the absence of really good project management skills leads to things going completely out of control. And what the oil companies have are very good project management skills. We certainly need those skills. So we don't need to, as it were, get rid of the oil companies. We do need to accelerate the transition away from it, the use of oil and gas. And you're absolutely right, too. It's about burning fossil fuels. It's not about the existence of fossil fuels. We will go on needing fossil fuels for plastics, for other chemicals and so on, and that will go on. But it won't be the industry we now have.
Tom refers there to the efforts of some of the oil companies to suppress the transition. But the image I have of the oil companies at the moment is not that they're kind of all powerful and able to stop progress, but rather that they've made no defence. I mean, where is the narrative that tells us what the last 50 or 100 years would have been like without oil? And as we say, it's not only about burning oil. Without the fertilisers, we would not have been able to feed the world. And those fertilisers were petrochemical products which came from the production of oil. Why is this story not being told?
Because I think people have, in this country, capitalists have always been on the defensive. It's not just the oil industry. Capitalists in this country have not served their country well in terms of defending the free market and the way it works and the wealth that it brings overall, not just for the... There's a sense, I think, in this country that if you've got shares in an oil company, you're selfish and will be doing very well yourself, but you won't be doing any good to anybody else. That is the sort of mindset that the oil industry has allowed people to get into. Now, I just mentioned at the beginning, I've always regarded the oil industry and the gas industry as an essential public service. I mean, there's no hospital that can survive without it. When you consider how a country... the quickest way to bring a country to a halt is to have a petrol strike. Nothing shuts it down as quicker. The railway, they're still trying to shut the country down. You know, we're all going on quite happily and quite normally. After 2 or 3 days of the petrol tankers going on strike, we're immobile. That remains the case. So that is... But the oil industry is frightened of pointing it out. They're frightened of pointing it out because they're worried that people like Tom, not that Tom is by any means one of the worst ones, but they're worried that Tom will give them a bad time.
I'll certainly hold them to account.
Isn't it rather important to have a very balanced discussion on this subject, which I hope we're having in the studio just at the moment? But, you know, people gluing themselves to pavements as though oil could be stopped tomorrow is absurd. And I would like to bet that those people have at least been on a diesel-powered train, even if they didn't arrive at the demonstration in a motor car, and I bet they've taken a package holiday.
Well, Michael, you're absolutely right that expecting... You've been in a profession where the idea of consistency is a sort of remote application, so I wouldn't expect that of anybody else either. Of course, there are inconsistencies in the way people behave. I think it's a very long and proud tradition in this country of people dissenting. Now, everybody can judge differently about where the boundaries of that are and where you're beginning to cause a problem for somebody else. But I wouldn't want to suppress that tradition, which I think is a central part of who we are as a people.
But wouldn't they do better to glue themselves to Tiananmen Square?
Actually, I've got an even better idea than that. They'd do better to vote. What's really clear is that young people disproportionately don't vote, and yet they're the people who've got most at stake at getting this policy right. So if they really want to do something that will make a difference at the next election, is make sure they actually turn out and vote.
Can I say, Michael, I'd have more faith in young people if they were to show signs of reducing their air traffic use. I mean, they use air flights. They go abroad for weekends and days, far more than any of us ever used to. They don't show any sign, myself, in practice. I know quite a few young Greens. When it comes to their practice, they're nothing. They don't act any differently.
As they said...
May I just anchor us on one thing? Just very briefly at the end. Will the development of Rosebank make any difference?
No, it won't make any difference to our energy security or to the bills that people pay. Will it make a difference, operational difference to the world? No. Will it make a symbolic difference to the ability of Britain to lead other countries into doing what they do to keep us safe? Yes, it will.
Yeah, you mean it's reputationally damaging for us?
Yes.
Interesting, Richard, is it not, that Labour has not said, or in fact, I think it's guaranteed that it will not rescind the exploration licences which are now being given by the government. And the significance of that is that exploration takes a while. Exploration may discover more fields, and therefore there may be more to come.
Yes. I mean, I don't agree with Tom, actually, that it doesn't contribute to our energy security. I mean, I know that it's not all going to be used here and that it's more oil than gas, but nevertheless, in the general scheme of things, a discovery of this size, and it's a very significant discovery, you'd be mad if you left it in the ground unless you knew you could do without it. And we know we can't do without it. And the next Labour government, if it is a Labour government, will know they can't do without it either, which is why they're not going to cancel it.
Well, thank you. I really value the tone of the discussion that we've had. Thanks to Tom Burke and Richard Ritchie.